So I guess we'll get started. The first thing I want to say is that this is a non-technical session. So we're not going to be looking at any scripts or opening text editors or doing any crazy stuff. If you were looking for a deep, technical, awesome thing, Louis is doing FileMaker and Node right now in Grand Canyon 8. So that's a great session. He's amazing. So if you wanted something a little more technical, I won't be hurt if you gather up your things and head over there. Other than that, thank you very much for coming here. I know that this is a big deal coming to DevCon, and it's a big deal to take time out of all the technical things and come see something non-technical. So thanks for doing that too. Just before we get into who I am, can I just ask a couple of questions? How many people here, well, first of all, how many people is this their first DevCon? Wow, that's very, very cool. Very, very cool. And then how many people would say that they work like completely on their own, only developer on their projects? I feel alone in the afternoons. Wow. How many people would say they're in a small team? And how many people are in a large team? All right, cool. That's great. Well, this definitely has a lot of applications for small teams and solo developers, although it'll sound more teamy sometimes. I think the opportunity costs when you're a solo developer are so high that you really have to get a lot of this stuff right, or it can quickly be overwhelming. So my name's John. I'm the director of Seed Code. I've been doing FileMaker for a long time. We make a dayback calendar, and we do a lot of modifications of it. We do little 2 to 4 hour mods of that calendar, helping people integrate it, helping people extend it. And we also do some larger projects, some very large projects. And what we're going to talk about are things that have made a big difference to us on both kinds of projects, and hopefully they'll make a big difference for you too. So at the bottom of the slide, it says surfer, trail runner, camper. If you follow me on Facebook, you know that we did some camping right before here. I went to New Mexico with Chiyoko and Jason and Shin and Ernest. We went to City of Rocks and Chiyoko's Ranch, and it just had an amazing time. And I'm leaving here and going surfing up the California coast to get back home to Seattle. And it's really good to do that with friends and alone to get some retreat time. And when I tell people that, I often hear, man, you're really lucky, which I am really lucky. And then sometimes you're really lucky that you have time for that. And that one always stings just a little bit, because like, we don't have time as people, right? We make time. I mean, both literally and metaphorically, humans make time. And I mention that because I think when it comes to software quality, a lot of people are like, that's nice and all, but I just don't have time for that. Now, you all are here, so you're past that. But a lot of people don't think they have time for this kind of stuff, because our projects are already late. Everybody's already working as hard as they can. We're already overbooked. We're already taking mods for 2 months from now, right? We're already this, we're already that. I can't add another process. I can't ask my guys to do one more thing, right? I totally get that. The way to think about, and I thought about that topic exactly that way until I had the kind of problems we're going to address today. The way to think about these techniques is that these are techniques for making time. That's all this is about. Make time for your life, for things outside of your business, make time to do new things in your business, to start a product, to onboard new employees correctly, whatever you use that time for. These are techniques for making time. So we'll just try and keep that in mind as we get going. Is that right? Yeah. I'm new to this thing. So the way this came about is we were hiring a new employee, Casey Embry, who's right here somewhere, who you may have read his blog posts on JSON parsing and script parameters. And when he was coming on board, I kind of wanted to take a minute and look at the things that we had been doing that were making us successful, and kind of write that down and transmit that to this next generation of people. So I wrote a couple of blog posts on what works for us and put that on our private blog that you can see here. And it turned out that there were like 4 ideas that I think make our firm run right. And that's what this talk is about. It's about those 4 things that it turns out I think help Seed Code be successful. So the first thing that works is having a private blog is a pretty good idea. It's a great place for your employees to write things, for you to put things in, to reference things your employees need to look up, like how do we do a refund, how do we handle when somebody asks about this or that. And it's a great place for when you're writing a public blog post to kind of put it out in private and let people kind of hash it out and stuff. So just a little tip, a private blog really works. So where does this kind of thing apply? We do very, very small mods, 2-4 hours, and we also do very, very large projects. And a lot of the techniques here have come out of one project that's coming up on 7,000 hours. The key idea here is that we treat them both the same way. The same project management techniques are used for kind of both of those projects. And that's like, in a sense, like that's the takeaway. Treat the big ones like the tiniest ones, and maybe tinier than you're used to doing. These techniques apply to, as I was saying earlier, small teams, solo developers. In fact, the smaller you are, I think the greater the benefit from getting some of this stuff right. And then while we at SeedCode do a lot of stuff in JavaScript and in other languages, this is about coding in FileMaker Pro. These are techniques we use when we work in Pro. So talking about terms, we're talking about code quality. People have a lot of opinions about code quality. My team will tell you that I have a lot of opinions about code quality. But we're not really talking about, like, should your if statement have one exit point or more than one exit point? Should your variables be scoped or not? What kinds of statements are faster than other statements? That's not the kind of thing we're really talking about here, because the more I do this, the less I care about that kind of thing. Quality can mean a lot of things. Quality could mean fast, right? Your code is super fast, right? Quality could mean terse. Your code is really terse and doesn't take up a lot of space. It's not very verbose. But that's not the kind of quality we're going to talk about today. We're talking about one thing, right? Money. How to write code that makes you more money. Because when that's working, you'll have more time. And when you have more time, you have more freedom. And when you have more freedom, you're more at peace, your team's more at peace, and you can tackle the stuff that's at the edge of your competency that makes you nervous, like some of that node stuff, bigger customers. You can do that stuff when you have a little more freedom, right? And to be fair, you can only really have that freedom if you have the money side of things straightened out. So what does money mean for us, for SeedCode? It means less rework, right? Less non-billable work. Increased delivery velocity. You're going to ship faster. We're going to talk about techniques that let you ship faster. Role portability, right? So that different people in your organization can jump on things. You're not always bugging the one guy who did the mod for the person with the thing. And that you can restart more quickly. I'm not going to read all my slides to you, but these 4 points kind of do matter, right? These are the things that I think make the difference between a company where everybody's on fire and a company where everybody's kind of a little more peaceful, right? Can you restart a project quickly, whether that's a new project or just a bug that surfaces on something you shipped a long time ago? Can people take on other people's roles? Do you ship quick, and are you free from rework? So then what do we mean by lean? Increase code quality while staying lean. We're not going to suggest you buy a lot of software. You do not have to hire testing teams. SeedCode is 5 people, right? This is how to do this stuff and stay small. You can spend a lot of money every week in this business for a really good reason, and you'll just go broke, right? So at some point, you have to work with what you've got. This is a work with what you've got kind of session. So another thing that works, just the tip, is defining your terms works. Right? Whether you're talking to your employees about their performance or you're talking to your customers about expectations, when you're using words like quality or I like that, it helps to define your terms. The example up here on the slides is, we're trying to talk at SeedCode about arguing with a value, right? Why do you like that? Well, I like that because it just looks cooler, it looks better. Versus, I like that because that seems to adhere to the principle of least astonishment, right? That's cool. That's a very impersonal way of arguing about something, right? I like the principle of least astonishment. This other person likes performance, right? So you can argue about those two relative values. It's kind of a more impersonal way to argue. Okay, so what we're going to talk about is what we do for each of these ideas. What do we do? What problems has it solved for us? And then some tips to implement this stuff in your own org. And these are really simple ideas, so the what we do is pretty simple. The problem solved part is what's a little more interesting and not always obvious. And when your developers are like, man, I'm not going to do that, it's remembering the problem solved part that helps you say, there are benefits here. There are benefits to doing these things. Okay, so we'll jump right in. This is the first idea. We'll spend the most time here because this is where I got the most resistance with my team. This is when I tell my friends, this is what we do. This is the thing they laugh at. Feel free to laugh, but this is the thing that makes the most difference. And all these ideas are tied together, but this is the thing. Demo is the new testing, right? If it's going to break, it's going to break up here, right? Right? So how do you get that experience into your day-to-day? So this is what we do. For every delivery, we include a 3 to 5 minute video. The 2 URLs at the bottom are the apps we use to do this, and the key about those is that when the video is done recording, it's already on your clipboard as a link. You can send to your customer or send to your teammate or whatever, right? So it's It's very simple as the coder, and it's the coder who does this. It's very simple to make that video and just send it to a customer or to a friend. For large projects, we've broken the project up into a bunch of little cases, and each of those cases gets a 3 to 5 minute video. So when you deliver the project, you've actually QA'd all these little tiny QA quality assurance. You've done all these little tiny videos. The video demonstrates the whole feature, and we use the customer's data. We never type in test or name. We use real data the customer's going to recognize. So I'll just take a minute or a couple of minutes, and I'll tell you what one of these videos looks like, because I think a lot of folks have some strangeness here. So we've got the stopwatch. So let's say the customer has asked us to sort the invoice line items on their invoice. I've got an invoice, I've got invoice line items, but man, I'd really like to click on the headers of that invoice line items portal and sort the line items. This is a really simple example. I'm sure you can all relate to it, but this is how we would do that video. Hey, Tim, thanks so much for letting us make this change for you. I know you've been wanting to change those invoice line items for a long time. We've implemented that. We delivered it on Thursday. Here's what it looks like. I'm going to make a new invoice for you. Click. You can see it starts with today's date. I'm going to pick a customer, click Select Customer. I'll type ABC. I'll pick ABC Customer. You can see the customer's information. Let's click and make the first line item. I'll pick it from a dropdown. Let's make the second line item. I'll maybe add an ad hoc line item. Let's make the third line item, so we have 3 in there. Okay, now we have our invoice line items. I'm going to click on the column header here, and you'll see it'll sort by quantity. And now that also works when I go to print it. So let me do the preview, and I'll show you that the print view also shows the sort. Let me close that window. I'm going to resize my window a little bit. And if I go to the next invoice, you'll see that it's got its own sort order. So the sort is kind of scoped to the invoice. So each one will have their own sort. And when I go back here, if I delete an invoice line item, you can see that the sort is persisting even after you delete. So I hope that's what you were looking for. You know, right now the default sort is by item name. I think you might want to have a setting for that, for what the default sort should be, and maybe that setting should be by user. So that's the next thing we'd like to build for you. If that works for you, here's a link to purchase another block of hours, and we'll get to work on that. Thanks. So that was 1 minute, 15 seconds. Now, it'll really take a lot longer when you do it for real. But let's talk about why that works. The reason it's going to take a lot longer is you're never going to get through that video in the first take, because you are going to find bugs. This is the most amazing technique we have found for finding things that you don't see. How come we always ship our solutions with the tab order wrong? Or I always did, right? Right? The tab order was always wrong. You deliver it, and we just don't, as developers, we just don't see the tab order, right? It's like the human brain is attuned to motion, so the hunter doesn't see the bird until the bird moves. Something very similar is going on when we're developing, and we just don't see this whole class of stuff that bugs the hell out of our users. The technique of making the video takes you out of developer mind and puts you into user mind. And it does so in some kind of miraculous way where you just see tons of stuff. And your videos are going to be more like this. Hey, Tim, thanks for letting us do this feature. Let me show you how this works. I'm going to make you an invoice. I'm going to click. Oh, shit. Right? And my guys will tell me, sometimes they'll put it in the chat, they'll be like, man, this one took 30 takes, right? Or 20 takes, or whatever. But you see things differently, which is the primary thing here. And that means less rework because you catch stuff. Everything else about this, I think that's kind of the obvious thing, right? Everything else about this is really subtle, but much more profound as you try and go fast. The thing that's weird is that customers can't evaluate our software, right? They really don't know how to evaluate software. They're not developers. And worse than that, they just don't know how to take what you've delivered and kind of accept it. So I see a lot of folks who are like, hey, Tim, I made that change we talked about last week. Tim has moved on. Let me know what you think. He's really moved on. He doesn't even know what you're talking about. But if he did want to find out if your invoice thing worked, what would he have to be able to do? Make an invoice. Maybe he's afraid to do that, right? Because it's his system. They're real invoices. Maybe he doesn't have permission to make an invoice. Maybe it's a bug, and he doesn't even remember how to get to the initial conditions where the bug is reproducible, right? There's all this ahead of him to be able to evaluate your work. He just does not have time. But he has time to watch that short video. And that is pretty cool, and it gets your work accepted. What works for the customer works for your team. So when he calls back in a couple of months and is like, hey, you know that thing you did? No. We'd love to do that thing you did last week. We'd love to do that in contacts. Let me know if you can get that done by Friday. Right, click. Right? Okay, even if you wrote the code, that's tough. But imagine if you hadn't wrote the code. But what if you had a video that you could just look at and know what was going on with that customer? Now, what don't you have to do? You don't have to find their file. You don't have to find the right version of their file. Find where in your system you store their passwords. Recreate their data. Find the initial conditions. All that stuff you don't have to do because you have a video of what worked. So it really increases role portability, helps you get back up to speed. It's big. The last point about it being a reminder that it worked when you delivered it, you know, we don't end up in court, despite what everybody's afraid of, right? That never comes up. But it does kind of plant this seed in the customer's mind that when these guys ship, they're always sending a video of it working. It's always working. And it just kind of builds this trust that's pretty cool. This is the technique we're going to spend the most time on, and then we'll move on. But there are a few tips here that are pretty cool. Record the videos if you're showing it off to an interested friend, right? You're not selling, you're not pitching. You're just kind of describing it with enthusiasm. If you do ask questions like, hey, Tim, should we do this or that, you got to put them in the email also, right? You can't just leave it in the video because you can't search the text of the video, right? And you really don't want to have to watch the video for everything, right? Like if you quoted them a price, you don't want that in the video. You want that in the email, right? So put some stuff in text as well. This last part, close with suggestions and next steps. You know, you kind of heard me rehearse that. It's actually really, it's a subtle thing, but I think it's really important, especially if you're solo. When I was small and when I had a smaller team, the difference between having enough work and being completely overwhelmed is razor thin, right? I mean, it's really thin. And so as a developer, we're doing this a lot, right? Tim, hey, here's that work you asked us for. I hope you like it. Thanks so much. Please don't ask me to do anything else. I am so booked, right? Now, you don't say that, but it's in there, right? It's in your email. It's lurking in the background. It's this tone thing of like, and it comes from a place of self-defense, and it makes a lot of sense, but it's bad for business. And the customers pick up on it, you know, just a little bit. They pick up on the distancing. So this is just a mechanism, right? Good intentions don't work. This is Bezos, right? Mechanisms work. It's a mechanism to make sure that your intention is always this. I want to hear what you think about this. I want to do the next thing for you. I want, you know, you don't have to do it next week, right? But you want to keep telling the customer that you want them in your world, right? And it's just a little mechanism to stop you from doing this all the time. And it's important. OK, so video works. This is probably the most important thing that Seed Code has done. It increases role portability, lets you restart projects more quickly. I mean, it's really good. It's really been good for us. So everything else we're going to talk about kind of works together with that. But by the way, when I was talking earlier, you were like, every video closes with a case, or every case closes with a video. What's a case? If you don't know what a case is, you need a bug tracking system, right? Solo, small team, big team, you need a bug tracking system, and you need one that you didn't write yourself in FileMaker, right? Because no matter what your insights are about tracking bugs, the guys that do this for a living have better ideas about it. The other great thing about not writing it yourself is that when your team bitches about the bug tracking system, you know, nobody takes it personally. We started with fog bugs when it was dank, and everybody complained about it. But you know, like the basics, like a case has a status, it gets assigned to a person. That stuff worked, and that turns out was all we needed. Having a bug tracking system is kind of key to everything else that follows, and that's the only thing I think you should like buy. The URL at the bottom, if you're a solo developer, do not worry about it. But if you're in a small team, take a look at the URL at the bottom. It's something called the Joel test. He uses it to help employees decide whether they want to take a job with a software firm. You should only take a job with a firm that can pass 10 out of the 12 points of the Joel test. It's what lets Seed Code kind of get to a place where our developers are quiet. They don't have to answer the phone. We don't interrupt them. They can work on their own gear. It's just a little checklist of things that go for developer peace and productivity, and it's really worth taking a look at. OK. Everything else kind of ties together with this. And seriously, if there are questions, step to the mic and ask them. So we don't go off into the desert, right? Have a vision and come back and give it to the client, right? This is not how great software is made. Great software is made in very small chunks. So what do? We deliver every 5 to 10 hours on a small mod. And for large projects, we deliver every week. Deliver means deploy, the whole shooting match. Import the data, reset the serial numbers, put it into production. Not deploy to a staging server, not deploy to something they can look at, deploy it. And this turns out to be, like all this stuff is kind of tied together, but this turns out to be really important. The biggest idea there is that you don't outrun your understanding of the problem, right? A lot of people, when they're new to software or when they're new to FileMaker, they're afraid that they're going to write buggy code, right? We're going to make bugs. In my experience, bugs are not the problem. Bugs are not the reason you have an invoice debate with the customer. Bugs are not the reason you lose the client. Bugs are not the reason developers quit. We don't make that many outright bugs, right? Like, it turns out that I actually got the decimal point wrong on the interest rate. That's a bug, right? It's an error, right? We don't make that many errors. What we do is we build the wrong thing. And that's the only mistake you can really make in a fast stack like FileMaker is you can make the wrong thing. And this is the antidote to making the wrong thing. The other thing about small chunks is just like we were saying, it's hard to evaluate software. It's easier to evaluate the software if you deliver something really small. It's easier for the customer to wrap their head around it. And by putting it into production, it gets evaluated by the people who are actually going to use it, not just by the informants. So if anybody, how many people do work in manufacturing? Like factories, like steel-toed boot kind of stuff, right? It's probably the most extreme example of the place where the informant, the person who's telling you what they need, and the user are of different socioeconomic backgrounds, right? They have a different culture, they may have a different language. It can be very stressful when you take that software that the informant has approved and you put it on the shop floor. And the shop leader is just like, I'm not going to touch that. You know? So if you wait a long time to deploy, you can have a big disconnect between what you've built and what people want to use. But by deploying all the time, you get past that. So let's just give an example of this, because this is, I think, something people are like, look, man, I'm working on a 400-hour project. There's no way I'm going to deploy it every week. The first, like, what do people even use? What do you mean put it into production? There's nothing that works. So here's an example. Customer says, hey, we want to build, the greatest whatever it is ever. And we listen to them, and we listen to their vision for the future, right? What do they want? What are the problems they're trying to solve? We take notes, we ask probing questions, we try and see what the ROI is going to be. But towards the end of the meeting, when we're talking about starting, like what day we're going to start, when do you think your first delivery will be? 1 week, in a week. Wow, that certainly moves you to the top of the list, right, of all the firms they're considering. You ask them what their hair on fire problem is. It turns out like the reason we're doing this right now is that we lost a big customer because we didn't respond to an RMA. We didn't respond to a return. We have a problem with our returns. You're like, okay, great. So what do you deliver in that first week? Well, you can't deliver much, right? You only have a week. So you deliver a stock contacts database, maybe a template that your firm already has, and you import all their data into it. In fact, that first week's work is mostly in the import. You haven't delivered much, right? It's just a contact manager, but they can start deduping their contacts, maybe tagging them. It's not much. But the second week, you attach a portal of returns, RMAs per customer. And they can see all those RMAs, and you've imported those. Right? Again, this is not complicated code at this point, but it's taken a couple of weeks. But imagine all the things that have surfaced in those 2 weeks. Are there massive objects in the data that didn't surface when you were doing your data modeling? Right? Is there some huge concept that hadn't come up yet? Right? Because you've imported their data in week 1 and 2. All these surprises that generally bite big projects later on are surfaced really early. And this is often the case at seed code, you have beat the legacy system in week 2, because the legacy system was Excel tracking for RMAs that wasn't shareable and didn't have any modification timestamp. And even without an audit log, you've beat the legacy system in week 2. Or at least you're kind of on parity with it, right? And then by week 3, you add line items to the returns. So they can talk about the returns and whether the return was approved or not. There's no automation here. You're not importing emails. They're literally typing those things in. So it's kind of slow and by hand, but you're delivering real code that real people are using on the first, second, and third week of the project. And after that, once the project's kind of underway, this delivering thing, this small chunk thing is pretty awesome. Delivering in small chunks is key. So a couple other things that happen. You end up with no half-done features, right? So it's terrible when you're opening up some code and you look at a script and you're like, that doesn't seem right. But it has to be right because you're not really sure if it's in production. So when you keep delivering it, you end up buttoning things up and shipping them, and you kind of know that stuff is done. It reduces cognitive load. I'm just skip around here a little bit. The reason I'm up here telling you that this works is because when we started this 6,000-hour project, we delivered every 3 weeks. And when I pitched that project to my team, that was the most ambitious delivery schedule we had ever contemplated, and everybody was afraid. The customer is essentially a bank, and we're essentially doing online banking in FileMaker. There's a lot of money at stake, and there's a lot of money that's getting transferred in and out of the system every week. And we were going to deliver every 3 weeks, and everybody was pretty freaked out. When we got to the really tough parts, Jason started delivering in between the 3-week deliveries. He started sneaking in these little deliveries because he wanted to get the cognitive load, the stuff that was undone, that hadn't been delivered yet, the data migration. He wanted to just make that be a little bit less so that he had to, the next week, he didn't have to keep it all in his head, right? And then when things got really interesting, he started delivering every week. And then he asked me if we could make that, if we could tell the client that's what we were doing, because it was so much easier. That's proof that this works, right? That when it gets really hard, delivering more often is easier. And like, yeah, he's written amazing scripts to handle the data migration and stuff. Maybe FileMaker will make a tool that helps us with that. Maybe 360works is releasing one that helps us with that. But the data migration is solvable, right? It's just work. The delivering every so often is important. The other thing that's really interesting here is it redefines the notion of what a bug is. You know, if you ask most software developers over a calm afternoon about bugs, you know, most of the things that a customer calls a bug are not what we would really think of as a bug. If you go out, yeah, some applause, right? If you go out into the desert, build the big, you know, the vision, bring it back, everything that's missing or wrong is a bug, right? Because you're done, right? So it's a bug. But if you're delivering every week, and all of a sudden you realize that some of the invoices in this particular case, their invoice numbers don't work when you send them to the legacy system, is that a bug, or is that just something you haven't gotten to yet? Something that maybe didn't surface in the conversation with the customer. Building software is a conversation between you and the customer where your understanding gets embedded in code, embodied in code, right? And as you talk more and more, the embodiment of understanding gets bigger and richer, right? But it's never complete at the beginning, and it's never complete for a very long time. So delivering small chunks moves the bug threshold way up. And eventually, you don't talk about bugs at all. You just talk about either misunderstandings or priorities, because it's something you haven't gotten to yet. And this is what reshapes the idea of rework, about billable hours, of retainer, and all these money questions that people struggle with. Imagine if you never spoke to your customer about bugs again. So a couple of tips. When you make a case, it should be binary. Right? This means something that was either done or not done. I watched the video and I know, did my developer nail it or did they not nail it? Improve the order workflow is not binary, right? I don't know if that happened or not. Binary things are really small. They're like yes or no. And then as you're getting into this and as you're writing cases, the more friction, the smaller the chunk you do, right? The customer that we've been working with forever and we deliver every week and it's all good, you know, cases get bigger, 10 hours, 7 hours, 15 hours. They get a little bigger, right? Brand new customer, more friction, 2 hours. Restarting a project for a customer that worked for a long time, worked great, but we haven't worked for them for a while, 2 hours. Subcontractor where English isn't their first language, 2 hours. It's tough when that customer comes back and says, hey, can we start up again? Here's my wish list. Thank you for the wish list. That is amazing. You know, we've got a lot going on right now. Why don't we deliver this one little tiny thing on Friday, and then we'll talk about the rest, right? You don't have to do it all at first. Yeah, question? Can we get the...
So question is, can you, if you plan to talk about this, can you describe doing this versus live development and why this is a better option than doing live development and challenges with that?
Yeah, sure. So the question was, you know, what about live development and why we chose doing this versus live development? I think it's interesting that Dan has intuited that this is not live development. And it's not. So imagine making that video live, right? This is when customers ask us, hey, we've just bought your calendar. It's in. It's not quite working the way we want. Can you guys just get on there live and do X? I want to do that, right? You remember when we had to travel to people's places of business to do work? I mean, FileMaker is much cooler now. I want to do that work remotely, right? I want to do it live and just help them. But I can't test. I can't make 1,000 invoices, right, and then delete them. I can't break things. I can't just go in there and rock and roll when I'm live. You just can't test. And that is why, that's the biggest reason we don't do this live. The other reason is that, you know, live is just, I mean, I guess if you're on site, live is no slower. But when you're remote like us, live is just a little bit slower, right? And the developer hates it just a little bit more, right? Because it's just a little bit more. And that adds up, right? And I don't want the developer to have these two classes of customers, the one they like to work with and the one they have to do live. So we try not to do anything live. And when we do things live, we're often teaching. So we're on a WebEx, we're looking at them, the cameras are on, and we're helping them and coaching and stuff. But I think the testing is where it really comes down. To tell you the truth, I actually hadn't prepared to talk about that, so if we have time for Q&A afterwards, maybe one of the guys from Seed Code can elaborate on why we do it that way. Okay. So the other thing is, like, how do you actually deliver every week? Because you have this big amorphous blob that you're building, right? Well, the every week thing is time boxing, right? The box is 1 week. You don't change the box, you change what goes in the box. So if you deliver on Friday, at around Wednesday, you're like, okay, am I gonna finish these features, or am I gonna button them up and stop work and kind of make cases for what's undone, right? Because those cases just become more small chunks, which means restart is really cool, because you have this little list of all the things you get to do next, right, that didn't get kind of done the first time. Ship anyway is such, and towards the end of the talk, we'll come back to this ship anyway thing, but ship anyway is so liberating, because you're never done. You're just going to kind of button it up, deliver it, and get it accepted. So breaking things into small chunks work. They reduce risk, and we don't outrun our understanding. So a couple of these things we're going to go through a little more quickly, but the idea is that you're coding for your future self. If you're alone, this is obvious. If you're in a small team, it's less obvious that role portability is important, but it gets important. And I'm not talking in particular about comments. Again, these slides you can download, so we're not going to go into this in too much detail. But we're not talking about necessarily writing comments as much as making a link between what was happening in the world and what happened in your code. And that link is your case number, your bug number, your whatever that number is, the feature request number. When you get into FileMaker and you start that script, you're going to write that bug number in a comment. That little thing unlocks some amazing possibilities. So a customer calls up and they say, we have a lot of time zone issues in Dayback, right? It's used all over the world. Daylight savings is complex, and we get a lot of time zone issues. So a customer will call up and they'll be like, hey, the time zone, bro. Whoa, that sounds familiar, eerily familiar, but I thought we solved that. So I search the bug tracking database, which is English, right? You can search for time zone and all these time zone, Australia, leap, whatever, and I find a case that sounds very similar, case 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now I open the Dracoventions tool, the Dracoventions developer tool, right, which has changed the way we all work, and I search for that bug number, and it opens up the line in the script where that bug number was written down. So I can find the actual code that addressed that customer's issue. That's huge. And I don't have to be the person who worked on that project to get back to that, to get to that link between one email and one line of code. Conversely, when I'm working in the code, you're like, that if statement just doesn't look right. I mean, I read the logic there. That just doesn't look right. Who the hell put that there and why? There's a bug number next to it. So I go search the bug tracking database, and I find the actual real-world use case that caused that line of script to be written. That is our key for role portability. It helps you jump from the real world and back into the code so that neither is so opaque. It's clear kind of what the benefits are here. Some tips for this. If you're just doing support, obviously I generally open up the support email as I'm writing the code, so that as I'm kind of coding, I can make the notes right in the email, especially if the customer has to do a few things. Like, hey, after you add this line to your script, you're going to want to run this other script to see these variables. You're writing that at the same time. That part seems pretty easy. But if you're making a product, how many folks in here are working on or kind of want to work on like a software product, like a vertical market or like a product? Oh, right on. That's cool. So the docs are hard, right? So I tell our developers to blog their decisions. You get to a fork in the road, and you're like, I could do this, I could do that. You got a private blog, just make a little blog post of why you took one step versus the other. Why did you put a switch in there to let the system use perform script on server rather than just use perform script on server all the time? Why you did that, just write it out, developer to developer. It doesn't have to be fancy. But later when the product is done, somebody else is going to come back to that blog post and make the public-facing version of that comment about why that switch is in there. Doing that religiously is the key to getting great docs out, because otherwise it's very hard to have docs that really reflect what's going on in your code. Especially if you're making a product like ours where you're making it for developers to get in there and change. So documenting your decisions work, in particular, putting the bug numbers in your code. Okay. This is the big one for me, recording technical debt and documenting the path you didn't take. Kind of like the idea about blogging, but this is more specific. We defer hardening until our work has been validated by the customer. That keeps scripts simple as long as possible. and you create cases for everything else. The idea here is that this is the feature, right? Send the invoices to the legacy accounting system. But there are all these spokes, and thank you, Chioko, for the word spokes. I wasn't sure what to call all this stuff. But there are all these spokes out here, right? So there's, first of all, there's making sure there are no duplicate invoices. Then there's making an audit trail. Then there's a report that it happened. Then there's some security about who's able to do this thing. Then there's trying to do this in the past, right? Like we closed this quarter, but we want to go back a quarter and re-export all those invoices because we made a change. There are all these spokes kind of around the feature that, depending on your personal style of development, you may think is integral to the feature. I mean, like it's not even the feature without the dupe checking. Or you may think is really ancillary to the feature. Well, you know, the fact that you can't do it in the past, that's not a big deal. But the key, I think, is to start thinking of just the kernel as what you deliver, and everything else you defer. And that's called technical debt. And you document it as it's happening. You make little cases for what's undone. So I'm working on this, and you're like, whoa, that line I just wrote is going to totally implode if they don't have this particular privilege set. Just make a case for that. Need to open up line whatever for this privilege set. Or this isn't going to work if there are any duplicate invoices or any customers with the same name or whatever your hinky code is doing, right? You're taking shortcuts. That's the point. We know you're taking shortcuts here because you're delivering every week. Because you don't really understand the problem yet. You haven't really agreed with the customer yet. You're working in a low information environment, so you're trying to do as little as possible. And then you're writing cases for everything that you haven't done or that is unknown. This is really powerful because you're recording instead of coding. And when you're recording instead of coding, you avoid a lot of problems. Partly, it lets you observe without having the pressure to fix things. And what I mean by this is something I think we've all kind of run into when we're talking to a customer. You go into the customer, you deliver something, and either that week or the next week, they're like, you know, I know I told you that this is how we do our invoicing, but I met with the people in accounting, and it turns out that's not what we do. We do this other thing. And I've seen a lot of developers, and I have done this. The impulse rises up in you to defend your work and shame the customer for changing their mind. And you'll say things like, hey, I get it, right? That totally makes sense. But this thing we wrote, man, that was complicated. and you know, partly you're defending your billable rate, right? You're like, I want to get paid for changing this because you changed your mind, yo. And partly it's just your ego, right? You don't want to be told you were wrong. And you're right, because if you've built this whole thing, if you've built every spoke, you have a lot of work to undo and a lot of dependencies, and that's going to be buggy. But if you've just built the kernel, your resistance to change is lower. And your resistance to change is lower in software and in everything else. You are a more peaceful person. And you don't end up shaming the customer. You can simply say to them, man, I hear you. Because they have enough shame, right? You're on the clock. They know this is going to cost them money. They know that they didn't do their research. Or they just know they're building a process that they haven't, like, you know, you're not replacing the existing process. They're making something up, and they're changing their mind. Don't shame them for changing their mind. You can be the guy in the room who's like, you know what? No problem. We're flexible. We'll have that for you on Friday. Because you didn't deliver that much in the first place. And that's really key. I remember when I first started in FileMaker, you'd be in the room with all the IT people and all the other stacks and languages they're using, and the customer would say, we want to do something complicated. And everybody else would be like, well, the security and blah. And you'd be kind of looking at your friend, and you'd be like, we can do that, right? We can just freaking do that. And you'd be like, we can do that. And it was cool, right, being the young kid in the room, being like, yeah, we can do that. You always want to be that person, and this is the key, right? Don't deliver too much. You defer the complex stuff until the kernel has been validated by the customer. So what do? You need a place to record the debt. It's called a bug tracking database. Don't build one, go get one. And get used to making a lot of small cases. When you're making that video and you're like, hey, Tim, I'm going to make you a new invoice. And then I'm going to select the customer. That pause, because you saw something that surprised you just a little bit, you make a case for that. Right? You make a case for all the things that kind of come up. So you're making cases for all this kind of undone work, all the spokes. And then you come back to them later.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Your support tickets and things like that for support, is that the same as your bug tracking?
For us, it is. Yeah, it's one number, feature request, great idea I had, an error, a spelling mistake in our documentation, the biggest new customer request we've ever gotten. It all goes into the same place, gets the same number. Other people do it different ways. The question was, is your bug tracking number the same as your like feature request number or quality case number? Yeah, for us, it's all like the same frickin' thing. Our customers, the question was, do customers have access to those cases? Our customers do not. I've seen situations where you have a customer portal and they can see the numbers and prioritize them and stuff. For us, we have two kind of vastly different use cases. We have a lot of like micro mods. There's nothing to list, right? We do a 4-hour engagement. We deliver the code back to the customer. They go off and make a bunch of cool stuff, and they come back when they need our help again. 7,000-hour project. He's got like a 40-page Word doc we're not allowed to see with his feature list on it, and he just kind of doles it out to us as he figures out what he wants to do next. So yeah, we keep all this stuff really simple. The idea here is that the mechanics of what you're doing, the making the video, the having a big list of bugs, these are very simple things. It's the effects and the benefits that are complicated. But what you actually do turns out to be super simple, right? This idea of recording your debt. Everything that you kind of want to do right now but don't have time because you're shipping on Friday, make a case for it. It's easy. Technical debt in code is like debt in finance. Companies borrow money so that they can do something now instead of saving up all the profit until they have like 400 grand and can buy the factory, right? They want to buy the factory now, so they take on debt. That's what we do as developers. We want to deliver now. We want to get our assumptions validated now. We want to get paid now, right? We want to get this off my plate and on so I can go on vacation now, right? We defer and take on debt so that we can get real things done, reach agreement with our customers now. And just like in finance, the only problem is if you don't know you have debt. If you don't know your mortgage rate is going to change. That's the problem. Same thing with code. If you don't know you have debt, if you don't know that export routine is vulnerable to people with different privilege sets, that's when you have problems. But if you know, it's no big deal. By the way, I meant to mention this earlier. You're like, how do you really deliver stuff where you're just delivering the kernel, not the spokes? There are lots of ways, but one way is to say, hey, I realize that this is going to be a problem if there are duplicate invoices. So I quickly write a check for duplicate invoices, and when I'm done with that check, I have a dialog that says, hey, there are duplicate invoices. This export doesn't work like that, or doesn't work in that case. Call Jason and ask him to remove the dupes by hand, right? And they call us. And because you're delivering every week, I mean, this doesn't live forever, but it lets you get going. Sometimes you don't even, you don't even have the dialogue. Sometimes you just make a note to yourself. But the key is like, document your development. Sorry, document what's undone. It's just the known. You just know that you have debt, and that's what gets going. This is a simple little thing, just a couple of minutes on something we're trying to do. When you're talking to customers and when you're talking to each other, the idea is cut to the chase by always suggesting a closing action. So when you're talking to your customer, something that they can answer yes, no, or click a link, right? So not, hey, if you like this feature, I'd love to build whatever for you, let me know. Hey, I'd love to build that for you, click this link if you're ready to get started. Do you have time to meet and talk about this next week? Do you have time Monday at 10 o'clock? Here's a GoToMeeting link, right? Or here's a Google invitation, right? Something binary that they can either say yes or no or click a link. And then this idea of using time words, there's a whole blog post on Dayback about this, but time words are things like, instead of like, do you have time to meet next week? Think timestamps, right? Do you have time Monday at 5 a.m.? And when you're talking to your developers, the biggest thing developers are dealing with is uncertainty, right? They're worried about their code, they're worried about their deadlines. They don't need more uncertainty from you. So don't tell them you need something by Friday. Friday is not a timestamp. Tell them you need something by Friday at noon. End of day is not a timestamp either, right? Because they're going to work till 2 in the morning to get it done for you, right? Give them timestamps. And the other thing about time words is to use chronological sequence. So instead of, I would love to do this for you, we'll need you to buy a block of time up front and get us your files. That's a big mishmash swamp of I'm not sure what to do next. I'd love to do this for you. After you purchase 3 hours here, we'll send you an email asking you for your files. If we get those files by Friday at 2 o'clock, we can have this for you Wednesday at 3. That is clear. That's the difference between 20 emails to the customer and 1. And when you're small, like this is what we're talking about, right? This is the stuff that matters. Why does it matter? Because you get paid sooner. Again, sending links, and often when I find myself wanting to write like a whole long thing to the customer about something, I'm often just going to record a video. You get so good at recording videos for quality control that you end up using videos for support. You're like, hey, customer, here are these 2 ways you could do this thing. Which one do you want us to code for you? A or B. And just make a video of the 2 options instead of trying to describe everything. The stuff we do is super hard to write about. Once you get used to making videos, you end up using them for support. And the first time you send somebody a video, say, it's like, Dear Tim, here's how you fix that thing. And you've used their name in the video, they love you. Okay, cutting to the chase works. So last thing I want to talk about, then we'll have some time for QA. Unknown versus blocking, right? We build code, we build software in a low information environment. We are not the customer, and we don't necessarily know everything that's going on. And if you're here and have been doing all this JSON stuff and talking about what's new in 16, you may be in a real low information environment, right? You may be working in a new language, in a new stack. The idea of what's unknown is a pretty big fact of life for any software developer. So this is something we've started doing that's working pretty well. Everything I've talked about so far, we have been doing for a long time. The videos, the code, the bug numbers in the code, and stuff like that, six years. This is a little bit newer as we've gotten more of the team out of FileMaker and into JavaScript. The unknown has gotten a little more crazy. So when we're checking in on a sprint or checking in with a friend or whatever, this is what we ask. Hey, what's done? And what's undone? You celebrate the done stuff. For the stuff that's undone, you say, well, okay, well, what's known and what's unknown? Like, what do you know how to do? It's just undone. And what do you don't know how to do? And for the stuff that's unknown, is it blocking you? And what this does, it breaks the project into this, right? It's either done or it's not done. It's known or it's unknown. It's blocking or it's not blocking. You've already shipped the done stuff. You're building the known stuff. So that's cool. There's very little uncertainty there. The developer's not worried about that. So the first thing this is going to do is take all the stuff that's like, oh my God, and break it into like there's a whole class of things that you don't have to worry about. You can just work. You're going to be fine. For the stuff that's unknown, stuff that's not blocking, it's great. It's just you don't know. So you're going to ask for help, because help in the software world is often asynchronous. You're going to post on Slack Overflow. You're going to email Todd. You're going to do something, but it's not going to happen right away. So surface that early and ask for help asynchronously. For stuff that's blocking, like I literally don't know what key to press next because I don't understand this. Well, that's live help, right? All hands on deck, get Tanner on the phone, get on video chat, call me at home, like whatever, that's live. But there's very little of that. And it's very useful to help kind of walk your developer through realizing that not everything they're dealing with is the great unknown. Most of what they're dealing with is really known. And the key question here is, hey, for the stuff that's unknown, do we need to ship it now? Like, is it blocking shipment? And you'll often get that. Like, I just finished this amazing thing, but we haven't quite gotten the authentication working, so we can't ship it. I think one of the things as a manager that your job is to be like, yeah, you can ship that. They can log in by hand for now, or they can log in this other way, or the login won't be great, or whatever, or we'll have to log in for them. The key is to get to shipment. And what's happening there is that you're helping somebody go from like, I heard this great quote, so that software developers don't get burnout because they work too hard, right? Nobody in this room, nobody who's coding at an intermediate level or above is afraid of hard work, right? This is hard. What we do is hard. Hard work is not the problem. This quote said, developers get burnt out because the requirements change under their feet, which I think we can all relate to, and because they don't ship. And I think that's the thing people miss. Is that the more unshipped work you have, the uncertainty of, has my work been validated? Did I get it right? Are there bugs? Is all that uncertainty, right? That's what eats away at you. And that's what this starts to address. Ship what's done, build what's known, and for the unknown, like, it's almost never blocking shipment, because you can always create cases for what's out there and then ship the rest. Yeah?
You're saying about shipping stuff and you don't always know whether or not it's complete. What happens if that end result is public facing? So you don't want to ship it.
It's a good question. So the question was, hey, you're talking a lot about shipping and it's not complete, but you're going to ship it anyways. What if it's public facing and you don't want to ship it? I'm only going to answer that in a very personal way, because I think there are lots of use cases, but I'll describe one. So we make a Dayback Calendar. It's public, right? It's got a live component, which is an online component. And when we make a change and push it live, everybody gets the change, like right then, which is pretty cool. We're doing this in FileMaker, and we're doing this in Google, and we're doing this in Salesforce. So we got a kind of mixed audience. And Tanner, a very good software developer, will frequently be like, if we do this, and this has happened a lot earlier, if we do this, we're not going to be proud of the result, right? This is not going to be what we want. You have to let me work on this longer. And I remember telling him very clearly, if you think we're going to be proud of this, you're in the wrong business, right? So it takes a long time to get to software you're proud of. And way before that is validating it with the customer and making sure you're building the right thing. and of the risks, of delivering something that might be a little clunky out to the users and building the wrong thing, right? Keeping it internal longer. I would much rather get it out and then refine it. And that's what we've done at Seed Code. I don't know how many people were on board with our first day back calendar, but there were some rough edges, right? Some really rough edges. And over time, you just those little chunks, you just start hacking away at them. So I think the bigger risk is to build the wrong thing and keep things internally longer. We're just releasing a major change to Dayback Calendar that we have kept internal for 9 months, and it was a huge mistake. We should have shipped it 10 times over by now. Little rough bits of it because of the stress I saw it put on the team and the fact that I'm not sure. In fact, we're taking a whole day here to reevaluate and make sure we got it right because we just had no validation on it for those 9 months. And the reason it was in-house for 9 months is because we thought, it's not really complete without this. I'm not really sure about that. I would be embarrassed to get that out there. It was just ego. And sometimes you have to make a switch, right? So this software is shipping with a switch. Customers can turn it on, whoa, and they can turn it off, right? And they can revert back. And sometimes that's what you need, right? But you got to get it out there and get validated. I do a lot of kayaking and dangerous. People wear helmets and all this stuff. It's not that dangerous. What you're really risking is embarrassment, right? When you bail out of your boat, you're swimming, right? It's embarrassing. And I think that's what we're risking in software, right? You're risking embarrassment. Well, go get embarrassed. Don't build the wrong thing.
So what leads you to not heeding your own advice here?
He's in the room. I have a very persuasive software developer. No, it was cool. That was actually the end of the prepared talks, and I'm certainly glad people are asking questions. Thank you. 5 minutes.
One quick question.
Nice.
How do you deal with dependencies when a client is asking for a feature set for something that you haven't built out? For example, we got to be able to sort the invoices, but you haven't even built the invoices yet. So how do you communicate and manage future expectations for stuff that you can't deliver now because of, I'm talking about dependencies, how things to do them. So.
No, absolutely. I mean, the ship anyway means that you ship some weird stuff, and stuff gets done by hand and doesn't, and it's often what you're deferring is automation and quality assurance and documentation and hardening. We use the word hardening a lot. You're often deferring the hardening. There are lots of techniques. You put up like these dialogues that say call JSON. The client that we're doing the big project for, he's got a very good sense of like building for the 80% use case. And so we build the 80% use case, and then the other 20%, they will literally call us and ask us to go into their system and just do stuff under the hood. Well, why not? They have access to these great developers. Like, why not use them for that? As opposed to like waiting to ship the 80% case until we've hardened all these little things around it. Because one of the things that's interesting is the 80% case isn't the thing that's shimmering and deviating and misunderstood. It's the 20% that's misunderstood by the client. And so even to try and build that early is just, So that's the kind of stuff that we're deferring. Yeah, Mike.
So would you reject a client who demands only to see a finished product?
Yeah. That's not, my line is that is not how great software gets made. Yeah, full stop. And it also, I don't know how many people are thinking about this, but this all has a lot of implications about how you get paid, whether that's getting paid up front and all that stuff, right? And if we're going to deliver all the software at the end, right, they're not going to have paid us up front. So, yeah.
How do you, if you deliver each week, how do you make sure that the customer validates it? For example, if you're rebuilding something, they have something that works to an extent. They're not going to use your customer-only database because they also want the invoicing part.
That's a great question. So the question is, how do you get validation on stuff that isn't really doing enough for somebody to use it for real? And you come up with creative solutions for this, and it ends up being very case by case. But I can tell you a couple examples. So often you'll find you have a process where the data starts in one place and ends somewhere else, right? So the outcome of your example is an invoice in a legacy system. Cool. Well, maybe one user uses your order creation module, and then you use ESS to pump that back into the legacy system. No one's ever going to use ESS for real. But you just do it so that you can take one process out of the old workflow, use it in the new system, but the starting point and the ending point are the same. So you come up with these kind of creative workarounds to make sure that your software is getting used. I have to say, like having done this, a bunch, that comes up less than you'd think, because often, especially for big software projects, like there's failure happening, and they want out, right? And so they want to start whatever's new. Yeah, I don't know if that helps. Does anybody else have any questions? Mike is with me in Seattle, and he can ask me all these questions personally. Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering how you managed the difference in expectation between, I've had lots of times where I give sort of an interface demo, I've built a basic schema, navigation, and it looks like it's almost done. Things, it looks like it's 80% done, but in fact it's only 20% done. How do you,
That's a great question. So you've given them this interface demo. It's like totally awesome. And then you have to kind of break it to them that like only this little tiny bitlet works. What's interesting is that the client is as busy as you are, if not busier. Your informant is super busy. So we can often outrun their ability to give us information. So you simply put it back on them. Like, hey, we'll build this as soon as you tell us how it works in enough detail that we can build it. And they can only go so fast. And hey, when they can go faster, that's great. That's when you put 2 developers on it. And you pay more and everybody goes faster. But for most people, you have more capacity than your informant does. And it just kind of takes care of itself. Yeah, Jeff.
Hey, John. I like the concept of the feature without the spokes. In my organization, we call that the happy path.
Nice.
But with this, the way that you do it, you're really exposing the technical debt, the cost of the technical debt. And I'm wondering how you explain that to the customer, because you've delivered a feature that works to them that you're done. And they don't see what they don't see.
So true. And our big customer refers to everything else, all the stuff he doesn't see, as plumbing. He's like, was this sprint all plumbing, guys? Like, how come I don't get any candy here? I totally get you. The only answer to that is that we are going hella fast, right? And eventually they know. They have other software teams, they're doing other projects, they eventually recognize that you're going fast, and that there periodically are going to be sprints where there's a lot of plumbing. There is a bit of showmanship to make sure that you don't have sprints that are all plumbing. But is that, Jason, go ahead.
I just want to make a quick comment on that, Jeff. The one-week feature forgives many of these things, right? Because even if you leave them without exception, you'll make up for it next week. So the one-week thing really is kind of the basis of this system. It really kind of drives the rhythm. They may be mad. If they're mad for 1 week, and then you stay up for them, you never understand. And so that's really the answer.
That's great, yeah, velocity. Go ahead. 1 minute.
Yeah, hi. As an independent developer, I'm often called in to put out the fire. It's like, I'm in pain, it hurts. And you run in there and you exactly, it's a small chunk, it's a deliverable. And I really like the video idea, but I think there's something else between that, because the video was instructional, it wasn't a pitch. And I'm wondering what, like I've got a lot of clients that I know what's good for them, but that's not what they asked me to do. So, you have any thoughts on that?
I'm not sure I quite understand the question.
The question is, you have the intro to this client, and you solve their problem, and you fix it, and that was their only priority.
Yeah.
Even though you know that maybe it's plumbing, but or maybe it's actually their entire workflow really is not appropriate. It's not normalized. They're doing all kinds of things that are inappropriate for a good database.
So we might end that video with a pitch with saying like, hey, we've done this for you. I hope that works. The opportunity here I see is to do X, Y, and Z, and kind of let them know. But
Right.
yeah.
Well, I like the hook idea. That
Thank
would
you.
help.
Thank you. I think last question, please.
Thanks. So you're not doing this live. But you're doing this live.
This live.
But you're not doing the weekly updates live. So on systems where there's all the customer data they're using, are you pulling over, importing all the new data every week? Are you updating the procedure every week to keep the system up to date?
Yep.
How long does that take?
So, it depends how often you do it, right? If you do it every week for the same client, you got a big client, you're going to be there for a couple of years, you eventually write some awesome scripts, and you come up with these systems. Like people say the separation model doesn't really stop you from having to do data migration. It can, right? There are ways where you can do the separation model. that would really help with this. I would suggest if anybody has any questions about that, to come to our booth, and we're happy to talk to you about the techniques we've developed for this particular thing. But I think it really depends on the solution, how you're going to do it. But the short answer is that you're eventually going to automate the data migration, but you have to do it. And you actually do it twice, because you move your development stack to the client, and then you move the client's data back to you. Because if you're not developing with their data, you are done. Thank you so much for the questions, everybody.